So when you talk about company merger and acquisitions in the gaming space, you think of companies like Microsoft, Sony sometimes, Tencent amongst many others, but very rarely does the name Nintendo come up in that conversation. Well, as of today, we do have an official story to report on from Nintendo that, yeah, they acquired a new studio. It's based here in the US, and it actually has some exciting implications as we talk about them recently, stating their intentions to reveal Switch 2 officially to us, whatever they end up calling it, by the end of fiscal year this year, which essentially is March 2025. We will at least for sure know about their next-gen hardware by that point in time, and if you've been around on this channel for a while, you will know that I am fully expecting them to reveal it to us later this year in the fall time, and we will likely see that system launch in March of 2025. But they now have an extra game studio that they can lean on under their belt. Some will actually see the studio and potentially even worry a little bit because of the state that some of their games have launched in, but I would like to argue a different perspective on that because they are definitely working on some more limited hardware with the kind of ports that they've pulled off so far for Nintendo Switch, and this is primarily a studio that does focus on exactly that, doing ports from existing games and bringing them to Nintendo Switch hardware as well as other platforms. But now it does seem like while there may be a run-up of them still working on existing contracts, this is ultimately just going to become an in-house Nintendo studio specifically for these type of projects, and that's very exciting. So we're going to get on the same page with all of this and what it means for Nintendo's broader future with new game ports and releases going forward. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And I want to first kick it off by hopping over to VGC, where they do have a detailed typed up article walking us through all this new info together. Nintendo agrees deal to buy Hogwarts Legacy, Mortal Kombat Switch studio. Shiver Entertainment worked on the recent ports. Nintendo announced on Monday that it's entered into an agreement with Shiver's current owner, Embracer Group AB, to acquire 100% of the company's outstanding shares and make it a wholly owned subsidiary. Since its establishment in 2012, Shiver has worked on porting and developing software such as Hogwarts Legacy and Mortal Kombat 1 to Nintendo Switch. By welcoming Shiver's experienced and accomplished development team, Nintendo aims to secure high-level resources for porting and developing software titles, it said in a statement. Going forward, even after it becomes part of the Nintendo Group, Shiver's focus will remain the same, continuing commissions that port and develop software for multiple platforms, including Nintendo Switch. The buyout represents Nintendo's first acquisition since the 2022 purchase of Dynamo Pictures, now Nintendo Pictures, and SRD. Before that, the company's last acquisition was Next Level Games in 2021 and Monolith Soft Xenoblade in 2007. Shiver joins Next Level, the developer of Luigi's Mansion 3, and Retro Studios, developer of Metroid Prime and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, in Nintendo's roster of North American studios. So a couple things that's rare about this. One, Nintendo doing an acquisition to begin with. Two, they now have an additional US-based studio, which is also not a common thing to see from them, but this is expanding their footprint in North America further. And there is some interesting history with Embracer Group and how many companies they acquired and some of the ones they're selling off now for literally probably a huge loss compared to what they paid for them. So this might have been one of those the value is right type of deals for Nintendo when shopping around for additional development resources. We know they're doing things like expanding their own internal headquarters and investing within themselves, as Nintendo likes to really only work with companies that kind of see their vision for games. But this to me sounds like they need a company on board under their umbrella that is able to do some of the porting that will be necessary for major third-party games to get them running effectively on Nintendo Switch and Switch 2 hardware specifically going forward. And I really think this will obviously be more of a play for their next-gen console than trying to get games like Hogwarts Legacy and Mortal Kombat 1 to run on the current Nintendo Switch. Now that is where some controversy pops up with this acquisition, because you know that those games, while they do run on Nintendo Switch, they also launched in some pretty rough states, specifically Mortal Kombat 1 looking extremely rough around the edges before they rolled out enough patches to kind of get it at somewhat of an acceptable visual level. Hogwarts Legacy, I give them a little bit more of a pass on. I would almost say that it's actually more impressive that they got that giant scope open world game to run on the Switch to begin with, when you stop and think about just how dated that hardware is at this point in time. And you have an open world action adventure RPG game that actually does run, all things considered, pretty well on Nintendo hardware. Granted, they had to use some interesting shortcuts, like the world's not quite as open and loaded in all at once like it is on the other consoles. There's some transition screens and things that aren't there on the other versions, but nonetheless, it is a playable game, and I do see People, for the most part, say good things about it on the Switch version, which, bonus question, if you own that, let me know in the comments down below, because I haven't picked it up yet myself, but I'm curious about just how well it runs through and through. But now, as Nintendo looks to fully acquire the studio, they're going to be able to direct them to any game projects they want to port to Nintendo Switch that they can enter into an agreement with to do so and do the work that's needed. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, if you look at any of the leaked specs or supposed specs for this console, it's loosely around the level of a PS4 Pro / Series S, maybe a little bit weaker than a Series S when docked. And then in handheld mode, it's supposedly around the power of a PS4. That is a lot more horsepower to work with when it comes to visually impressive games from a third-party perspective. And now Nintendo has a dedicated studio they own that they can put to work on various different projects like this. Now, it does sound like initially Shiver Entertainment is going to finish out any existing contracts that they have, so you will legitimately have a Nintendo first-party owned company actually working on ports potentially for like Xbox and PC besides the Nintendo Switch itself, which is going to be an interesting time. But I would imagine, and a lot of the talk online seems to suggest, that once those contracts are finished out, they will indeed just become an in-house Nintendo studio that's logically only going to work on Nintendo-focused projects and not continue to have that revenue stream come in from the other platforms. But nonetheless, I think that as we talk about more and more information leading into Nintendo's next generation, which we may do a deep dive video on one coming up around the complexity of game development now and how Nintendo really does have to position themselves a little bit different this generation as they get into that next level of the upper echelon of how graphically impressive games can look. They're going to have some extra resources, and this is one of those moves. And Shintaro Furukawa, even in a investor briefing, did indeed say that merger and acquisition was one way that they could continue to grow their resources and essentially keep up with the demand of games just naturally becoming more complex in nature and taking longer to develop each said installment in any kind of franchise. That is just a reality of where we are at, but I do think Nintendo is kind of uniquely positioned to be in this environment, and I'll go into that in a separate video as mentioned. But the question is this where Nintendo is done shopping, or are they going to kind of go down the list and look at a few additional studios that they might be able to bring in-house, especially with Embracer Group looking to potentially sell off a lot of the companies it has acquired? I mean, it could indeed be the first of more to come, but again, if you look at history, acquisitions from Nintendo are few and far between. They're very picky on who they work with and who they bring in into their own company, and they like to ideally normally grow organically within the company and actually invest in themselves, and also kind of foster an environment where you're lifelong talent, lifelong employees, and you have that quote-unquote Nintendo DNA that they like to talk about. But I do think it will be interesting to see what games for Switch 2 Shiver Entertainment gets to work on first to port over. I'm thinking a lot of existing third-party games that are just out there and kind of out of the conversation of being able to run natively on Switch hardware, at least easily, could be looked at here. I don't fully understand the contracts that Shiver will be able to or not be able to work on depending on what kind of agreements are made, but this is essentially extra development horsepower for Nintendo at the end of the day, and that's very exciting as we talk about their next-gen hardware being around the corner relatively soon. So let me know in the comments down below what you think of all of this. Do you think that a company like Shiver is something that Nintendo should be excited to have under their belt? Are you a little bit more worried that with the launch state of Hogwarts Legacy and specifically Mortal Kombat 1 and how broken it kind of was at launch, that you think that this is a studio that maybe isn't necessarily what Nintendo wants? Although, again, keep in mind they're working on Switch 1 hardware, which is extremely dated. And which third-party games that are out there today that didn't make it to Switch are you most hopeful that we see ported over to Nintendo's next-gen platform now or at some point in the near future? So thanks so much for watching the video today, everyone. Make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings with me in the comments down below before you leave, regardless of if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, ring your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.